Hi, I'm Miles Goldsmith, and this is my podcast, Game Design Hour, where I interview the people behind the video games you love. On today's episode, I'm interviewing Michelle Olsen, the game director behind Beasts of Maravilla Island. Before I get into the episode, I wanted to let you know about today's sponsor, Hoffman's Woodstuffs. They specialize in making custom furniture from reclaimed or sustainably sourced hardwoods. They also make custom goods and gifts for any occasion. You can find a link to their website using the link in the description. If you stick around to the end of the episode, you can find out how you can get 20% off your next order. Now, let's get into the interview.
Hello.
Hi.
Pardon my cat. He's decided to make an appearance.
So when did you first realize you wanted to be a game designer?
Oh my gosh. I've wanted to be a game designer for a very, very long time. I can kind of trace it back to when I was about 7. I said that I wanted to be a game designer. Of course, at that time, I didn't really know exactly what it meant, but I knew that I loved video games and I knew that they meant a lot to me. And I remember one day I saw a TV advertisement for, I think it was Academy of Art University, that said something about game design being a real degree that you could get. And I was like, oh my goodness, that sounds great. That's exactly what I want to do. And then my answer just kind of stayed the same forever. But it wasn't until I was 12 that I played a game that really had a very profound effect on me, which was The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. And after I played that for the first time, I was it became more of just a childhood dream to something that I very seriously wanted to pursue. And I'm very fortunate that I've wound up being able to do it. So, yeah.
So what were some of the first few video games that you worked on, and what lessons did you learn from them?
Oh my gosh, that's a really good question. I went to school at USC, so they have a great game design program, and so I made all of my first games through them, especially the first video games and stuff that I made. But gosh, I think I learned different lessons from every game that I made, for sure, because I participated in a number of digital game projects that were either very small, a couple days or a week long, but then also a couple that would span years or an entire semester. So they definitely all have really great lessons to learn. I'm trying to think of some fun ones though. The games that I made in college that I feel mean the most to me is one is called Plasticity. I worked on that with a very dear friend of mine named Aim Zhang, and we worked on that together as a 2-person team for a class that was a semester long, where just the two of you had to develop the entire game by yourself. And that was a game that was about a subject matter that was very near and dear to my heart. It was about plastic pollution. And so we worked really hard to try to evoke this very different and evocative message in the game that we were making. And I learned a lot with that, in how much I really value trying to communicate a powerful message through the mechanics of the game. And that's been something that I've embodied in all of the design work that I've done after that as well. That the sort of conceit of how that game plays, it wound up turning into a bigger project where we took the prototype we made in that semester-long class, and then we developed it for an additional year with a much bigger team. But we tried to turn the concept of plastic and its convenience into a game mechanic. And so we had puzzles with 2 options. One option was very straightforward and easy and convenient, and the one that people would gravitate towards. And then one required a little bit more thought and a little bit more sort of understanding the context of the situation. And depending on which choice you made, when you returned to that same area 10 years in the future, you would see how your actions impacted the environment. A big thing we learned there too is that if you're trying to communicate a message that is important in a game mechanic, or something that could be a little bit more political, giving people hope and not just making them feel like, oh no, I messed up, I'm a terrible person, but instead making them feel hopeful and feel like they making them have an emotional reaction that's positive, was a very big learning experience. But I've carried that through all of the work that I've done afterwards too, even if I'm making a game with about mental health, or if I'm making a game about conservation, or if I'm making a game about anything, no matter how lighthearted or serious it might be, understanding the importance of trying to weave emotions into the mechanical experience of the game has been very big. Yeah. I could talk about more, but plasticity was a kind of a big turning point, I think, for me in terms of like the games that I've made and what I've learned. And obviously Beasts of Maravilla Island is my big game at this moment in time, and I've learned countless things from that project. But
yeah, the plasticity game sounds really fun. Where can people play it if they're interested?
It's on Steam, actually.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So how did the idea for Beasts of Maravilla Island first originate?
So the idea for that game originally came from how much I love engaging with creatures in real life and in games. I absolutely love animals. And I was very dissatisfied at the amount of games, or rather at the lack of games in which I could interact with big magical creatures in ways that were nonviolent and meaningful. Like, I love Pokemon, but you fight the Pokemon exclusively. And I love Breath of the Wild. It's my favorite game ever. But like with the big, beautiful dragons in that game, all you can do is shoot them with arrows. So I was very sad that there seemed to be very few games where you could interact with magical and interesting creatures in ways that didn't involve being violent towards them or with them. And then I absolutely loved Pokemon Snap, and there was nothing like it since Pokemon Snap had come out. It's kind of amazing that in the year 2021, there's been a surge of photography games, which is kind of beautiful, because I feel like maybe me and a number of other people had the same thought of like, photography is a really amazing and compelling mechanic in video games. What if we did something with it? But anyways, I digress. So that was kind of the root of it. But I had this sort of exact inspiration for the specific mechanic and player experience goal when I was on a trip, and it was on a train looking out at this beautiful lake. And when I looked out at this lake, I was just like daydreaming and thinking about like, how cool would it be if a giant sea monster just came out of this lake right now? And I was like, gosh, what would I even do in that situation? And I was like, I'd probably take a ton of pictures of it. And I was like, I feel like there's something compelling there. And then it kind of just like went from that little seed of an idea, and then weaving it into the things that I care about in games, my love of animals, my love of nonviolent mechanics in games, and my love of 3D adventure games, and trying to weave all of those things together in a beautiful package that then became Beasts of Maravilla Island. And I'm very fortunate that I've had an amazing team that has helped me bring this idea to life. How
does the original idea for the game differ from what ended up getting shipped?
Oh man, that is a great question. It's definitely very different. I shouldn't say that. It's very different in some ways, but it's stayed very true to the spirit. Mm-hmm. Like, since in the earliest vision boards that I have for Beasts of Maravilla Island, the player experience goals and the values that I'm trying to promote and the basic structure of the game, like the soul and spirit of it, it's the same, which is actually kind of amazing. That's something that my team and I have been like, oh my gosh, like we'll look at really old levels and documentation and stuff, and it's actually kind of incredible how that's been like the unwavering constant. But of course, like the scope has changed, the details have changed. Like originally we wanted the game to be much bigger, for example. Mm-hmm. Like we wanted to have like a cave zone that you could be in. We wanted to have way more large creatures present within the environment. But because the Beasts of Maravilla Island actually started out as a school project, it was our senior thesis project for university. And then we were fortunate enough to be able to take it after graduation and turn it into a commercial product when we ran a Kickstarter and we signed with our publisher. It was all very serendipitous and wonderful. But we were working with the scope constraints of a school project for a while. Mm-hmm. So we were like, okay, we'll have to cut down on the number of large creatures because the pipeline for animating bigger quadrupedal creatures is very difficult. So maybe we'll only do 3 of them, and instead, and we'll like populate our world with smaller creatures that have a simpler art pipeline, for example. And we wound up trimming down to just the 3 zones that we've shipped with now, instead of, I think we wanted 5 originally. The 5th one escapes me, but I remember we were like, 5's a nice round number, but it's too big. So it didn't get quite there. And then there were a lot of other features that we really wanted, but just wound up being out of scope for the project. Like we really wanted a day-night cycle. We wanted the ecosystem to sort of change and evolve based on what time of day it was. That didn't make it in, unfortunately. And we played around with a lot more sort of like traditional 3D adventure game mechanics in the beginning. But then we decided to kind of pare it back and make it a lot simpler so that the focus could be more on the experience of being present within nature. And we were really inspired by the simplicity of games like Abzu, especially, where most of what you do in that game is you swim around, you perceive the nature, you interact with them in like positive and lightweight ways. And that allows you to place a lot more emphasis on the beauty of the environment and making it feel like you are not the star of the show. The creatures in the world around you are. So we kind of leaned in that direction, and that also helped make the scope more manageable for us.
As you said, the game was funded via Kickstarter, and you raised just over $25,000, which was double your original goal, if I'm correct?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. So what was the process of the Kickstarter like? What did you learn from crowdfunding?
Yeah, so with Kickstarter, it was that was something that wound up being very, very serendipitous, and we all felt like just so lucky and grateful that we funded in one day, and then we doubled our goal by the end of the campaign, which was really fantastic because I was not convinced that we were even going to make $5,000. Like originally when we were setting up the campaign, I was going to have a much smaller goal because I was very, very nervous that people wouldn't care about the idea and wouldn't really believe in it. But I was fortunate enough to have some really great mentors that encouraged me to run a Kickstarter in the first place, because they're like, this game deserves to have an official and commercial release, and you should make enough money that you can like cover the sort of final costs of development and just wrap it up with a nice bow and ship this bad boy. And I was like, okay. But I was very, very nervous about running it to begin with, because I've run one Kickstarter before, but it was much, much smaller. The goal was $3,000, and we only wound up having I only had to fulfill like 100 backers. Like it was a much smaller scale, but even that was very challenging. So I was like, oh God, this sounds really tough. But so this was a totally different animal, and that like we had a much larger goal, and then we doubled that goal, which was amazing. But the process of sort of setting up the Kickstarter was really fast. I honestly, the turnaround was kind of ridiculous, because we went from being unsure about doing any sort of crowdfunding to begin with, or commercializing our game in any way, to like, okay, I guess we're running a Kickstarter in 14 days. And then so we were like, okay, let's get all the assets together. Let's start our outreach plan. Let's get this thing going. And my team is just filled with wonderful magical angels, and we pulled it off somehow. A lot of learning came from that, for sure. Like we're still, we're a super young team. This is our first commercial game. And we learned so much just about like how no matter how close to shipping a game you think you are, there's always so much more to do. Like the process of shipping a free game versus shipping a game for money is so different. I didn't realize how different it was going to be. And so that definitely caused some delays on our end. But I also learned that like really amazing opportunities can come out of the most unlikely places. Like we found our publisher because of the Kickstarter we ran, where someone from Whitethorn saw our campaign and then reached out to us, and then we wound up getting a publishing deal with them, which was amazing. And we couldn't have done what we've done now without them. But I've learned tons about just like giving yourself way more time than you think you're going to need, and being like, I've understanding that like releasing for consoles as well is like a way longer and more difficult process than I ever would have dreamed. I knew it was difficult and crazy, but it's even more than I thought it was. And so we just learned a lot of the sort of like harsh realities of what it means to ship a game, for sure. And I wish that I had been able to sort of have more realistic expectations on the Kickstarter to begin with. We thought we were going to ship just a couple months after the Kickstarter originally, but so much stuff changed, especially after like we signed with the publisher and our scope increased a little bit, and we wanted to add more creatures to the game. It wound up getting pushed out even longer. So Yeah, definitely the biggest takeaway is like plan for way more time than you think you're initially going to need. And then also expect like serendipity to ensue and like find great opportunities, or rather great opportunities will find you. That's definitely something I didn't expect. And it's been wonderful.
You raised an extra $15,000. What extra did that allow you to do while making the game?
Yeah, so the additional funding allowed us to increase the scope of the game a little bit more, which was great. With that extra money, so I guess just for sort of like information and transparency too, working on Beasts is not a full-time job for any of the people on our team. It's like a nights and weekends kind of passion project. But thankfully, with the Kickstarter money that we raised, because some of our teammates were in between graduation and full-time work, we were able to use that money to set up to sustain some teammates to work full-time on the game for a couple of months, which was really wonderful. And that allowed us to push it from just a group of friends getting together a couple days a week and on weekends to like jam out on this game, to having a small devoted team of people that for about 2 months were able to just work full-time on this project. And that the delta of quality change, even just in that like small stint of full-time work, was enormous. And so we're very, very grateful that we had the funding to do that and to allow some of our team members to just put more of that time in there. And just sort of to go with that, like it allowed us to flesh out our third area. For example, originally our third area was only going to have one creature in it, which was like our big boss creature. But we got to add 18 additional creatures to it, thanks to the additional support of the backers that we got. But yeah, so that's most of the money, or in fact, all of the money that we got in addition to our original goal was directly paying our developers to be able to put more time in on the game.
So what is your process for creating one animal?
So it depends on if it's one of the bigger key creatures or if it's one of the smaller ones. But the sort of general design philosophy for them is we wanted them to feel familiar, but with a magical twist. So all of the creatures in our game are inspired by real animals in some form or another, whether that is a hybridization of multiple animals together that it then forms something magical, or takes most inspiration from just one thing and then puts a sort of spin on it. But every single one of our animals can be traced back to something in real life that has hugely inspired us, because a huge thing that we want to try to make players feel with our game is the inherent magic and wonder and beauty of nature. And that, I mean, in fact, all of the animal names that we have in the game, even though they're made up, like if you look up a buckeye butterfly, those are real. And like, you'll be like, oh my God, they have crazy eyeballs on them. That's wacky. We have a magical version of it that's bright blue and purple and like sparkly, but there are real world counterparts that are really fantastic. And the same can be said of all of our creatures. We sincerely hope that someone might just be like, I wonder if this is inspired by anything, and they can look up the name, or they can even just ask us and be like, oh yeah, this is inspired by like this plus this. But so the familiarity with a magical twist and then taking heavy inspiration from real animals is a huge part of the process for us. And for our key creatures that exhibit much more behaviors and have a sort of like a more prominent presence within how they interact with the protagonist and stuff. With all of those, we did a lot of research on compelling animal behaviors, things that would be realistic to the types of animals that we wanted to take inspiration from, but then of course adding that magical twist to it. My lead designer and I were really lucky to have a fantastic mentor named Dr. Michael Habib, who worked with us in the Los Angeles Natural History Museum collections and showed us animal specimens and skeletons and things so that we could study the morphology and anatomy of these creatures. And so we could weave those into our designs to make them feel even more believable, which was awesome. So those were a lot longer and more like involved process, just to make sure that we could capture how they moved well, we could capture how they behaved well, they could feel like they belonged in this magical island. And then after that, it would just be like off to doing concept work and workshopping and things like that. And a fun fact about our key animals, I guess, is that each one was designed by a different artist, which is pretty fun. I designed the otter dial. I'm very proud of that one. But yeah.
What was your favorite creature to create and why?
I think I'm biased. My favorite to create was the otter dial. I have a huge love for that cheeky little fella. I think it's mainly because I've loved doing creature design like as a hobby for a very long time, and I'm the game director of this game, so I didn't really get the chance to do a lot of like final art that would make it into the game. I would do like vision work and some concept pieces and stuff, but I hadn't really had the opportunity to do many designs that would make it into the game and like doing the official turnarounds and stuff like that. But we were a little tight on art bandwidth at the time when we needed to get a design for this otter creature done. So I was like, okay, like I'll do it. It sounds great. So and that one was just a blast. We got to go to the herpetology collections, which had like reptiles, and I got to study like super cool amphibians and stuff too. And then the mammalogy collections as well. And I just got to like learn a ton of awesome behaviors about like caimans and crocodiles and otters. And like, it was just great. And so I remember then like I went to a coffee shop and I spent several hours just like doodling what this interesting like otter crocodile hybrid was, because we knew that that's what we wanted it to be. We knew we wanted it to have otter characteristics because we wanted to take inspiration from the giant river otters that are in the Amazon rainforest. And then we knew we wanted something that was like crocodilian as well because of caimans specifically, which are like those crazy cool long snouted alligator looking dudes. But we knew we wanted something that was playful and cheeky because we wanted to give players the opportunity to have a direct and playful relationship with one of the creatures in our game. So manifesting all of those constraints was a challenge. His design went through many iterations. He started looking way more reptilian at first and looked a little scary, which I like, but people were like, no, he needs to be cuter. And I'm like, okay. But it was very fun to workshop that design and then tossing that off to our incredibly talented 3D artist and animator, Ah Young. She did an amazing job putting that together. She also made me this Otterdile plushie that I actually have behind me right now. But it's the same person. She's very talented. But anyway, so he's my boy, as you can see. But yeah, and I think that the team has a big soft spot for this creature in general, just because the interactions were so fun. You get to play fetch with him. He plays hide and seek with you. Like he's just a super fun character and had a super fun design process. So I think that one's my favorite.
Sorry to pop in here, but I need to tell you about today's sponsor, Hoffman's Woodstuffs. They specialize in the design and fabrication of custom furniture made from reclaimed or sustainably sourced hardwoods. They also make custom household goods and gifts for any occasion. You can find them on Instagram at Hoffman's Woodstuffs or find them using the link in the description. Let's get back into the interview. Were there any cut creatures that were either far along in the process but just ended up getting cut, or a creature that you really liked that ended up getting cut?
Yeah, actually, there were a couple. The one that sticks out the most for sure was actually just a little doodle that our art director did once, and it was of this like this koala bear creature with like flowers on it, and it was the cutest thing ever. Like she just drew it for fun at one point, and we were like, we just has to get in the game. Like this is absolutely adorable. Like what the heck? But like we had already kind of locked our set of creatures for the jungle at that point, where we had our 18 like critters, as we call them, which are like the sort of smaller ones. We had our main key animal already locked. And there was a time where we really wanted to include what we were calling internally like secondary animals, which were like not quite as sophisticated as the key animals, but not quite as small as the critters. And they would occupy kind of a space in between, both in like their size and also their behavioral complexity and things like that. But that entire subset of creatures, unfortunately, needed to get cut for scope reasons, which was a real shame. So that koala little creature, that was one of them. We had talked about like a tapir kind of creature at one point, which would have been so cute. We talked about like my lead designer and I love the Pokemon Noivern a lot, and we had talked about a sort of bat dragon style creature that would have occupied that subset, but yeah, unfortunately didn't make it into the game. But so there were some fun designs there. Thankfully none of them went through like the full 3D pipeline before they got scrapped. It was mostly just concepts, but still sad to see them go.
How many animals are in the game, and do you plan to continue adding more in future updates?
Yeah, so the number of animals we have in the game now, I want to say it's 58, if I can do math. We have 18 critters in each of our 3 zones, and then we have 3 key animals, and then we have 1 additional creature that likes to hang out. I hope it's 58, or I'm going to sound like a real doofus. But but as for adding more, at the moment, that's not something that we really have planned, but I think it'll depend on like the reception and success of the game, and depending on if we decide we want to add more content. But for now, our sort of top priority is continuing to try to make the base game experience as performant and polished and great as we possibly can. It's been wild pushing it up and being like, the build is flawless, and then like a ton of bug reports come in. We're like, okay. And so like just trying to manage those and make sure that we're pushing out updates as fast as we can. So that's our top priority now, but adding additional content isn't something we've discussed too much, but who knows? It could happen.
What was the most difficult part of the game to design?
I think a big constraint that we gave ourselves if we're designing was we wanted to make sure that everything that a player would do in a level was non-destructive to the environment, would not be harmful to wild animals if done IRL. So like that's why you can't pet the animals in our game. I know it's very sad, but it's like people shouldn't pet wild animals in real life. That's why we also don't have things where you can just like bring out a bag of food and feed the animals, because feeding wild animals also isn't a very good idea. We kind of figured out some ways where we felt like that might be okay, or if it's like, okay, if they're trying to get this thing in the world anyway, then maybe it's okay to use it as a tool. But we gave ourselves a pretty rigid set of mechanics of like no violence, no environmental destruction. So like no knocking trees over to open pathways, or like no like having a creature explode a cave for you, or no chopping things down, like things that are pretty common, I think, in a lot of adventure games to sort of further progression. A lot of those things involve like destruction in some way, because that's just like an easy way of like opening up paths and things like that. So working with those constraints was very challenging, but we were able to find plenty of ways around that, which is great. And we kind of just had to embrace in some ways that like maybe there doesn't always need to be an obstacle in your way. Maybe like certain parts of the experience are opt-in and you can skip them if you want, but then like, why are you playing the game? Like there's content here for you to experience. So that's something we wound up just needing to lean into and embrace when we felt like we couldn't organically put an obstacle somewhere. Another big challenge sort of related to that was even with these constraints, we wanted to make sure that players still felt like they could engage with the creatures meaningfully. Of course, the easiest two would be you can pet them and you can feed them. But as I mentioned, those are things that we did not want to allow players to do, because those are not things that we want players to see and embody and be like, oh, cool. Like if when I go to a jungle or something, I should go try to pet the animals, or I should go try to feed the animals, because that's really bad for them. And we don't want to promote that. So, but we wanted to make sure the players still felt like that they could engage with them. So it took a lot of ideation and sort of thinking about what out of that experience we feel like might be valuable. But that's when we landed on a feature that I really love, which is our whistling system. So every creature in the game, you can whistle at them and they'll each do something different. So whether that's like a unique animation, or they'll turn their head to look at you, or they'll make a little sound. In some cases, you use your whistle to interact with creatures to help you solve puzzles. Like if you whistle at the otterdile, he'll spit water at you. Or if you whistle at the big boss creature, he'll blow a gust of wind at you. And so we used our whistling mechanic to allow for something that you can do to engage with creatures in a way that is still aligned with our values and still makes you feel connected, and like that they're listening to you and they're acknowledging you, but in ways that like in real life, if you went up and whistled at an animal, there's nothing really wrong with that. They might run away, or they might look at you. But yeah.
What is your favorite whistle reaction in the game?
What is my favorite whistle reaction in the game? This one, it's a little silly, but there's one beetle that we have that when you there's two that they're both insects. There's one beetle that has just been, I think, my favorite bug design since the beginning. It's called the Moonstone Longhorn Beetle, and it's like very simple, but it's adorable. It's like this little like green and kind of opalescent blue beetle. And one of my designers was doing the whistle reaction animation for this, and like we have them all emit like a little sparkle particle, and sometimes they'll like wiggle their antenna or do something. But one of my designers decided to also add a little like burst of like emission from it when you whistle at it, and we've done that with some of our other creatures too, like especially in the Glimmering River. But something about the way that it just looks on these little longhorn beetles just like really got me. It was like, because you see them, they live in this big hollowed out tree, so it's a little bit dark in there. And then when you whistle and they like all start lighting up, it's very cool. Like it was a wonderful surprise, because like it wasn't something that we had talked about when we were talking through the brief of like, okay, here's what the animation should look like. They just like added that in for a little bit of spice, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. This is amazing. Like, great work. So I love that one. And then another one that I really love is we had one backer who wanted a grasshopper that sang. And so we have a grasshopper in the game called the Humming Malachite Grasshopper. And if you whistle at them, they'll sing the main theme back to you in like little like buzzy way, but it's very cute and lovely and delightful. So if you find those guys, definitely make sure to whistle at them. It's very cute.
What was your biggest design, story, or creative challenge, and how did you overcome it?
A big one was one I sort of spoke about already, which was making sure like making sure that all of our designs adhered to the rigid values that we had set, and like making sure that all of the aspects of the game were aligned with that. I think that's always really challenging to do in game development, because there's so many established paradigms for games that revolve around violence and destruction and things like that to sort of enforce progression. So taking a very firm stance against that and trying to embody that in a genre that typically relies pretty heavily on violence for progression in the form of like a 3D adventure game. That was very, very challenging. But I talked a little bit about sort of how we overcame that, but there's a million more. So let me try to think of a new one. This one's a little bit more, it's kind of like half and half, like creative, but then also logistical challenge, where something that we always had to juggle was how short our deadlines were, with it starting as a student project and needing to sort of like meet the different milestones that were set out for us within the course of a year. We had to try to make sure that our game was still delivering on the experience goals that we had, which were, and like the scope that we had planned, which was pretty lofty for a student project with a sort of year-long development cycle. So needing to sort of balance those deadlines with the vision that we had, and trying not to creatively compromise too much, was very challenging. So that it required a lot of just cleverly scoping down certain things, like understanding what we needed to cut, understanding what the soul of a zone or a puzzle or experience was. And I mean, a big thing too was just like learning to cut stuff that we really loved and felt like had a lot of potential. But either it just like wasn't working, or we didn't have the time, and we knew that there were more important creative things that we needed to sort of like elevate. And so needing to sort of like learn what to prioritize in service of the holistic creative vision. That was a big challenge, but it's something that we had to be pretty smart about, because we were like, we want to make this huge and awesome with the deadline that we had. But yeah, so I think that was a really big one for us.
The one issue I've heard people talking about online about the game is the frame rate issue on the Switch. What are your plans to fix that going forward?
Yeah, well, fantastic news with that is our patch for that is actively being reviewed by Nintendo as we speak, and it should hopefully be up very soon. I'm like optimistic that maybe they'll wave it through, and maybe it can be up by the end of this week. Maybe it'll be up early next week. But yeah, it's like it's been so tough because we just get, especially when you're getting ready to ship a game, and when you have a small team like us with day jobs to manage and things like that, you get pretty tunnel visioned on the stuff that you feel like is more important. Like there were some bugs that we really didn't want players to see or to experience because we knew that it would like wind up in a very negative user experience. Or there were issues that we felt like just took much higher priority, and we played the build so many times on our Switch dev kits that like you just start to become desensitized to any sort of like graphical inconsistencies or frame rate issues that you might see. That it's something that we've like learned from, and that we just have to we have to make sure to sort of shake that tunnel vision if we decide to make another Switch game in the future, of that this is something that is a lot more important than maybe we were giving stock to. But we're really grateful that people have been willing to give us that feedback and have been willing to be patient with us as we get a patch out. We're feeling really good about all the improvements that we made. I'm to level with you. I'm very tired because we've been working like around the clock since the 12th to try to get this patch out. We were up until 6 a.m. last night to try to get it ready to release. So I hope that the people of the internet are listening because we're taking it very seriously. But the point being, it's been tough to hear that people have had negative experiences due to frame rate, but we're really hoping that now that we've done a ton of work to completely change how our game is optimized on the Switch especially, and we have a pretty steady frame rate on it now, we're hoping that people will give it another chance and maybe we'll have a more positive experience with the frame rate issues mitigated. But yeah, it's like a totally fair critique, and we're all sad that we didn't quite realize the intensity of it before it went live, but we're learning more each day.
What was the biggest lesson that you learned from working on Beasts of Maravilla Island?
Just like in general?
Yeah, and just in general.
That's such a good question because I've learned so much. Like there's so many different categories of things that I've like learned from. I think the biggest thing that I've learned is that like, I'm trying to figure out a good way of phrasing this. So I might be a little bit roundabout in the way that I am discussing it. I never thought that I would be able to ship a game as the game director at 22. Like I never in a million years thought that was something that I was going to be able to do. I wanted to be a game director forever. Like I wanted to be like a designer, but as soon as I found out what a game director was, I was like, that's what I want to be. And I never thought that would be something that was possible. And so much of what made it possible was the fact that I have such a ride or die team that is just like filled with incredibly amazing talents and people that like believe in me to lead them to victory and believe in the project and what it has to say, and are just put in so much of their heart and soul and passion and love into something that means so much to me. And I think even though it's like a little bit sappy, like just knowing like and learning that people can have that amount of like love and passion and belief for a vision that someone else has is awesome and like profound and amazing. That like just realizing that that's something that's possible, and that you can assemble a team of really incredible individuals that believe in this as much as you do and work tirelessly to try to make it happen. Like that's just been like a huge and wonderful sort of revelation in coming into this industry, that it's like that even though there's like bad stuff, it's also filled with like really amazing people, and that like all of the people that are on the team are like very dear friends of mine now. And like, I like love hanging out with them. And even when days are really hard and we're tired and we're working until 6 a.m. to get a patch out, we're like having fun and memeing together and like having a great time. And so, yeah, I think just like learning just how how working on a commercial game can be filled with tons and tons of ups and downs, but like if you have a wonderful group of people, no matter how hard it is, like it's going to be great. Mm-hmm. Like I think without my amazing team behind me, I would have like been like, nope, this is too hard. The gamers are too mean. I'm out of here. But I didn't. Like I had amazing people that was like, bring me back down, or be like, no, it's cool. Like we're gonna fix it. Everything's gonna be fine. So I think that's been the biggest learning for me, for sure. And just like understanding the value and importance of having really fantastic people by your side and knowing that they exist and are out there.
How large was the team?
Yeah, so it's fluctuated in size a bunch, because when it was a student project, like in that sort of active development during school, that was when it was at its biggest, because people were in the class like for credit. And it was about 25 people during the school year. After we graduated, it kind of shrunk down to 15, which is still pretty solid, but we mainly like our like core team of people that are in kind of like every day is really like 5 people. But like thankfully, like we have these 15 folks that like pop in and help us out, which is wonderful. Like they come in like once or twice a week, which is great. Like all the help that we can get, especially since it's like a nights and weekends passion project. Like any ounce of help that we get is amazing. But like the true core of people that it's like, this is our second job, there's like 5 of us.
Do you plan to have any major updates to the game, maybe more content or DLC?
At the moment, it's not something we've really talked about. I think it'll depend on sort of like the demand for it. Like if people want to see more of Maravilla Island, if we have the funding to do it, then potentially it might be something that we're able to do in the future. But nothing concrete has really been discussed in terms of like DLC and major updates for us yet.
What's next for you? What are you working on now?
That's a great question. Well, I haven't started really working on anything new in terms of like personal project work. Now, like I mean, my day job is pretty cool too. I work at Oculus as a game designer, so I work on VR games and stuff during the day, which is super fun. And so been working on their project, which is it's called Horizon, and so I've been able to continue working on that. So that's still super cool. It's in beta right now. If folks like social VR, you should go check it out. But really, like most of my mind is still on just like getting Beasts done, beautiful, tied up on all the platforms, like good to go. But I'm hoping that maybe after that, once we're out on PlayStation and Xbox as well, and like frame rate is steady and everything's good, maybe I'll be able to start dreaming up new stuff again.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, it was so great talking to you.
And that's how the interview went down. Thank you so much for watching today's episode. Make sure to follow or subscribe. It's different on every platform, but it would mean the world to me if you did so. If you want to get 20% off your next order from Hoffman's Woodstuffs, the sponsor of today's episode, you can use code GDH20. Hoffman's Woodstuffs specializes in the design and fabrication of custom furniture made from reclaimed or sustainably sourced hardwoods. They also make custom goods or gifts for any occasion. A link to their website is in the description, and you can check them out on Instagram at Hoffman's Woodstuffs. If you want to keep up with updates for Game Design Hour, you can check us out on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Game Design Hour. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time on Game Design Hour.